acceptance. The long arrow hit the ground in front of Penelope. Adi looked up at him, enraged at the man-like being. "What are you doing?" Adi yelled somewhat incessantly, given that he was in front of the gates to a city that was not his own. As himself an outsider, and although he did not know how these people, treated outsiders, he did, in the back of his mind, think it unwise to yell such a thing at one of them, especially given that they were, of course, firing upon him. The two of them stared at one another for a few moments longer, and although the moments seemed to last a long time to Adi, they of course did not, and before he knew it, that the being was knocking another arrow. Clearly he wanted Adi to leave, but for some reason the others were not firing on him as this one was. Perhaps he was in charge, but that didn't make sense to Adi either, as would he not have the rest of them fire upon him as he did? Perhaps not, but Adi thought it more likely that he fired upon him as a simple warning. Perhaps even he did not want to kill Adi, though he looked quite disgusted and enraged. "What are your orders?" Adi called, allowing the arrow to fly close to Penelope, who, now taking Adi's lead, stood still, fearless as a behemoth should be. "You must have them." Adi didn't know a lot about armies, but he did know a little about fighting, and he served in the army in his home country for some time ago, before everything fell. Perhaps they had seen a man such as he was before, and their orders were to, instead of kill men like him, to scare them off or injure them. Adi did not know, but he decided to risk it, for he did not know where else he would go if he did not go here to the city. And besides, he needed to see the place. He wanted to. By the time the fourth or fifth arrow, whichever number it was, Adi was losing count, had slipped by him. This one on he and Penelope's side, he was yelling once more, "Let me in! I demand that you let me in!" The being shook his head, put down his bow and arrow, and spoke to the other beings in their tongue and elegant yet somewhat coarse language. To Adi's surprise, the gate opened and out walked the being that had fired upon him, slowly at first, but then at a more confident speed, and directly towards Penelope, who, despite her size, did seem nervous. The being had a sword strapped to his left side and a dagger strapped to the opposing, but it did not seem as if he would unsheath either. He seemed to grow comfortable, and as he approached Penelope, he was smiling, a grimace of some sort, laughing unkindly at Adi, as if he thought of him as something lesser, and in a way that constituted an air of disgust. "What exactly are you doing here?" he asked Adi in a strange accent, but strangely eloquent and elegantly, in a way that made Adi wonder where he had learned to speak as he did. As the being stood awaiting Adi's reply, Adi thought quickly of what to say, as this entire scenario was so unexpected to him. He thought they'd try to shoot him, that he was taken aback. "Let me in," said Adi, trying to keep up the air of confidence that he had previously had, which was more or less something real about him. "Pardon me," asked the being, chuckling. "You want in?" Adi nodded somewhat unassuredly. "Yes." The being stepped aside. "Go ahead," he said, almost coyly, leaving behind a maniacal sort of feeling that seemed to echo throughout Adi's very bones, and especially throughout his stomach and chest. He felt almost sick. Adi nodded, thinking to himself that it could be a trick. And perhaps it was, but despite this, he stepped forward with Penelope and towards the city gates, which open remained. Why he did not ask the being what he was or what the place was beyond Adi, other than that he thought that perhaps he would not have told him, though he probably would have. At the very least, Adi knew that he would have gotten an answer, but interestingly enough, he didn't want to hear it from the being. He wanted to see everything for himself. He wanted to discover, and if they didn't kill him once inside of the city, he would most certainly discover it. When he entered, a dozen or so guards surrounded him, but Adi looked at them sternly until finally, to his luck and fortune, they stopped moving and stood still, pointing their long spears at him, each black with blue ribbons and a silver spearhead. In the wind the ribbons swayed, but Adi did not make a move, and neither did these men, whatever they were. In fact, that was the first question that Adi spoke. What are you?" he asked. None answered. "Where will you go?" a voice called out from behind him. "Where will you go inside of our city?" It was the being who had fired the arrows at he and Penelope. He had followed them, and now he had his hands behind his back, as if he had them stuck in a perfect trap of his own design. Though admittedly it had been a simple trap, if that indeed was what it was. Adi looked over to the being casually, though admittedly he was quite nervous at this point, and smiled at him. "Are you going to kill me or no?" The being smiled even larger and stared up at him, purple eyes beaming, yet he shook his head. No, of course not. You are welcome to our city and its contents. Uh-huh, said Adi, and what's the condition? The beast, said the being. It must stay with us. It's a she, said Adi, looking at him, a look of sorrow washing over his face as he looked down at his hands to think. You will not kill her. No, said the being, somewhat seriously. We will not. Adi nodded, unsure of whether or not to believe him. What is your name? I am Ithaca, he said. What is yours? Adi nodded. I'm simply Adi. Your full name? Adi shook his head. Just Adi. All right, Adi, said the being as if to mock him out of annoyance. Probably because Adi had not given his full name, but Adi did not wish to give everything away, though he supposed that it would not matter if he did. The being finished his sentence. Get off of your beast and come with me. Adi did as he was told, giving Penelope a look, and to his surprise she seemed to understand him. He walked with Ithaca as two of the guard directed Penelope calmly, making Adi think that they must be used to these beasts. Perhaps even they rode them as he had, he was not sure, but he would ask later on. For now Ithaca was speaking. This city, Ithaca stated, this is a home of ours. He nearly purred. The man, the being, whatever he was, stood over Adi, tall, and though he was a tad thinner, he was still quite lean and muscled. Adi was not sure that he could best him in a fight, should he have to, and his fear rose just a bit, though he kept it contained and tried to keep himself calm. He knew that probably he would not have to fight anyone, at least for the time being, but he was not sure what would happen to him next, and he was suspicious, though it did not matter. He was in his city now, Ithaca's city, or whomever it belonged to. He was an outsider, and surely he would be treated like an outsider. He wanted to know what that meant. Where are we going? Adi asked. We're going where you deserve to go, Ithaca smiled. And what does that mean? It means, said Ithaca, nearly laughing, that you get to stay. Now, Adi was a little scared. He wanted to know what he meant, but he kept his mouth shut, understanding that he was not going to receive any more information from Ithaca concerning the matter. So he asked a different question. What are you, and what are you people? We are the obelisks, as your people may call us, said Ithaca, taking on a more serious tone. Or the Nur. Do you have a word for yourselves in your own language? Adi asked. Ithaca nodded. Yes, but it does not matter, for now you would have difficulty remembering it, as our language is hard for most of your kind. You mean men? Yes, men, Ithaca stated simply, seeming to think more of Adi than he had prior. What about, Adi started to say. You will learn of our people, I'm sure, Ithaca said, cutting his words off, his devious smile returning. After some time they arrived, the two of them, at a part of the city that could only be described as dirty. Once they had officially arrived, if there was such a way to arrive in such a place as that, Ithaca gave Adi that coy, devious smile and gestured for him to look. You can stay here, he said. Adi looked around, looked at the city folk around him and the tight, cramped space he was in. The high wall of the city looming over all of the houses, small and dirty, though cleaner than what Adi was accustomed to. With a sly grin himself, Adi looked over at Ithaca and stated, This will do nicely, thank you. Ithaca broke face for just a moment, replacing his coy grin with an eerie grimace. Fine, he said. Enjoy your stay. He motioned with his hand over his shoulder, as if he were tossing something like a piece of trash onto the ground. Adi stared at him a moment as he left the area. Good riddance, he said. And with that, decidedly, he was a part of the society within the great city. In a way. Days passed by, and each man or woman, whatever they were called, either ignored or obviously hated him. It was not long before Adi found himself starving and in a state of mind to steal. That was inevitable, but just as he was about to take a loaf of a sort of strange bread from the local bakery there, a girl pulled him aside, a woman really, though small, despite the trend of the people within the city to be quite tall, the men at least taller than Adi, and the women not much shorter, and she told him something that he would never quite forget in his own language. You are not forgotten, she said, staring up through bright purple eyes. Now come with me. She took him by the hand and led him to a house nearby, just a few houses down, where inside there were two old and small people, neither of them speaking a lick of Adi's language, obvious by their endless protesting at the sight of their granddaughter, presumably letting in an outsider like Adi, let alone one of another race, or so that's how it looked to Adi. Strangely, he thought to himself what it would take for him to be accepted in such a place, and somewhat eagerly he placed himself in the center of the room. The older couple looked at him, and so he looked at the woman who had brought him into the house and said, Tell them I can pull my own weight. The woman looked at him. You don't understand where you are, she said. No one will accept you. Tell them that, Adi said vigorously. I will pull my weight. She nodded suspiciously. If that's what you think you can do. She seemed to have some faith in Adi, despite his appearance, In fact, Adi thought to himself, perhaps she had faith in him because of it, or perhaps for who he was or who she thought he might be. She translated what Adi had said to her parents, and as the grandfather scoffed, the grandmother quickly followed suit. But they were too old to do much else, and so from that day on, Adi was a part of their family. At first, none of their neighbors, nobody really, liked Adi, to say the least. In fact, they seemed to outright hate him, or looked down upon him in a mild or even hostile disgust, making Adi wonder what exactly he'd done to deserve such treatment. When, out of frustration, he asked Ira, the woman who had taken him in, about why it was that her people treated him with such disdain, she simply replied, "You're a man, these people," she gestured. "They are my people, but they are not. I am an outsider here, too." Adi nodded, trying to understand. "Why is that? Don't they accept you?" She shook her head. "Sure they do, but it's not enough for me," she said. There was a tear in her eye. "It is not enough." And with that, Adi thought that he understood. Ira, born in such poor state here in this city, though Adi wouldn't have called her living conditions not luxurious but acceptable, could not accept where she had been born. In all honesty, to Adi, she seemed much more intelligent, much more accepting and kind than her neighborly counterparts. He wondered then what it might mean to her to live in such a place, and he came to the conclusion that it was a miserable experience. Perhaps she had seen him walk in with Ithaca. Perhaps she thought that Adi had some kind of influence there, though he, of course, did not. Adi did not know her motivations for wanting such a man as himself, unaccepted as he was in such a place, but as far as he could see, she seemed to care for him. It gave Adi hope, watching her watching him, and she showed him their way of living, their language. It was some time before Adi was fluent in the language, though he did not ever become entirely fluent, a few months at least, and the summer was passing into fall when the locals would ready themselves for the harvest. Adi was curious about this, as he had farmed in his own country back when his country had yet stood. Now that it was gone, he had been out at sea and traveling for a long time. How many years he did not know, and he had lost track, but enough. As yet, he still remembered how to farm. He was curious, and he wanted to know how they conducted their operations in regard to farming. Perhaps he could be useful there, he thought, as at this point in time Adi desperately needed, not wanted, to be accepted by the people in the city. Little progress had been made in regards to his acceptance within the community, and despite his efforts, he could not seem to break through the frozen ice that was the impregnable wall of the people of Ygris, the city in which he now dwelled. He wondered, too, what had become of Penelope, that great beast of which he did not know the name, and a description of whom Ira did not understand, as she had rarely left the city walls and never had she seen such a beast. Adi thought that a good thing, but a sad thing, for such a beast could kill a woman or a man of any race, yet to never see one. Adi pitied her, and he pitied her people, for their view of the world was as narrow as they were tall, their foresight as short as their eyes the bright indigo that constituted their distinct appearances. Despite this, when Adi and Ira would go out of their small district, the lower district, and into the other cities, especially the upper district, Adi was always in awe of the city and its magnificent beauty, its people, their intelligence, their ability to maintain such a place. He saw farmers, he saw soldiers, he saw scholars, and the like. He saw, observed, and recognized all or much of it, and he learned through their own language what it all meant to him, a lowly man. And at first, it didn't appear to mean much, but when finally he was asked to accompany a small party of men outside of the city walls passing Ithaca, who was a captain, it turned out, and head of the city guard, he discovered an opportunity as Ithaca smiled down at him in passing, his coy grin a reminder of where he now stood in regards to everyone else in the city. The lowest of the low, the filthiest of the filthiest, but he was not, and his opportunity he did find out on that field that day. The sun shining down on him brightly, the other workers slowly gaining respect for him and his strengths, as he showed them new farming techniques of which he learned from his father, from his own people. The people of the city, the Nur, saw another side to him, one that could benefit them, namely. That was the day that Adi was first accepted by any member of that city, and his name was Ohai, and he taught Adi everything that he needed to understand.